children need that. They need to know who they are and where they come from, because that was what I was taught as a little girl growing up on the reservation, is to know your language and know your culture, because that's who you are. That's the roots of our people. So with that, I share my language and culture at ECIS with my students. So with that being said, Pila Mayapi. Thank you.
I have a biography of probably 50, 60 books that we share with our Native students. We would like to have these books throughout the district. They're all written by our Native artists, and they're all written in some of our Native language as well. That's Dakota, and that's my language as well. So we would really like to pursue this with our artists, our Native people. We have great illustrators, we have great writers, and I would really, we would be blessed as well to have these shared with all students. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. I appreciate you, Captain Long Soldier, Audrey. I appreciate all of you that came to share and help us honor Native American Heritage Month and to set the tone for ancestral lands to be here a part of our meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, and I know you have a lot of business tonight, and I wish you well.
Thank you.
It's very. Yeah, we need to see the legal stuff.
I don't know.
You might want to keep that here. Thank you.
If you're, are you heading out now?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
because you don't have room, I mean, you're crowded. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for honoring us with it. Okay, we're moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is to discuss the school unification plan and how the applying the declining enrollment criteria and how that came about. So before we proceed to a vote, I know that many of our virtual viewing audience and folks here with us in person are waiting for those votes. It's very important. I know people are anxious and concerned, but I would like to ask our superintendent, Dr. Madero, to please share a few words with us. Dr. Madero, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, Board of Education, everybody in attendance, those up on the 14er, and the 300 plus that I understand are watching us live. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone, and also know that this is not easy. Or frankly, arguably, it's the hardest thing that the superintendent of the board can do. But the reality is that it comes with the territory, right? So as unpopular as it may seem and unconscionable for some, sometimes doing the right thing can be painful. As I've repeatedly stated, this is about our students. This is not about finances. It's not about statistics. It's about programming. It's about having a wider range of academic offerings, mental health supports, activities, and experiences like we just heard from Andrew Romero. Imagine if that is not available. That's the reality that we're faced with. However, after listening to feedback of the community, I'm going to shift, not in totality, because I think that we all have a duty to do something. We're looking at a $23.5 million deficit for next year, and that is not okay. That is hard duty. But we also are responsive to the community. And what resonated with me the most Tuesday night, some members are in attendance, and what I saw this morning when I visited schools in the snow, the concept of neighborhood schools and how important it is. So when I saw youngsters fighting the snow and I'm worried about my tires, then I realized that we have to possibly take a different approach. So as such, I'm going to modify my recommendation, hopefully for the last time. So I'm asking respectfully the board to vote on Denver Discovery School and Mathematics and Science Academy MSLA. Since those are two co-located schools, which aren't neighborhood schools per se, although I'm sure there's neighborhood school students who attend those. And hopefully, I can get the endorsement, and then we can see how we can recalibrate and engage with our partners, and also those impacted principals of MSLA and DPS, depending on how tonight goes. So for your consideration, MSLA and DPS.
I appreciate you sharing those words, Superintendent Marrero. It is a very, very difficult decision that is weighing on each one of us. And each one of us has been very thoughtful and considerate and looking at everything, including the scope of the community voice in this. So I appreciate that you also heard that and considered the weight of that in your decision and bringing this forward. Any school, the vote for any school closure is going to be impactful on each one of us individually. I understand that. At this point, we, the next items on the agenda are to make motions to vote on each one of those. But now that we have this new recommendation, I have to ask the question to my board about your recommendation and moving forward with the vote for two schools, Denver Discovery and MSLA, otherwise known as DDS or MSLA. And so we'll have to make a motion for that.
Point of information for the council. Question, point of
I
information.
need to,
I have the floor now.
I need to
Point of
acknowledge,
information.
Vice President Anderson, I need to acknowledge you when you do that, so if you can just not interrupt and let me acknowledge you so that you have the floor. Vice President, you may have the floor to ask your question to council.
Thank you, council. How is this in compliance with the 24-hour notice? I am concerned that yet again, we are changing at the last minute and want to ensure that we are in compliance with the law of posting, because what we were originally supposed to be voting on was 5 schools. And yet again, we are now with a modified recommendation to try to get votes instead of passing or voting on what we originally had before us. So I'm concerned about this being in compliance with the law.
So the law requires that the community be on reasonable notice of matters that may come before the board. And so this is a sort of a gray area in the sense that the same materials that have been noticed are still before the board. Right? So originally there was 5, now there's 2. Because the board will not be taking action on 3 of the proposed resolutions, it's not in violation of the law. And because we did notice it, it's just at this point now the board's not taking action. The board still could take action, but it's not in the superintendent's recommendation. It would be problematic if we added 2 schools, but it's not problematic if we remove a few schools.
Point of inquiry for the superintendent then.
Vice President Anderson, you have the floor to ask a question.
Superintendent Moreno, why are you now modifying the recommendation yet again? I hear that you're saying that you've seen communities and you now have empathized with them, but I personally take skepticism to your modification because I'm concerned that we yet again are picking winners and losers. And if we were going to get down to 2, then we shouldn't have put 8 schools through this sort of trauma and turmoil, especially now that there are 3 schools that are just now finding out your new recommendation. And this is the first time, unless my colleagues, if you've been alerted and I missed an email, this is the first time I'm hearing of this recommendation, and I feel blindsided that I was not made aware and ample notice and finding out time before the general public that you were going to yet again modify your recommendation and doing the exact same thing board members asked you not to do a month ago when we were at MCT. Now we're doing this thing again, and I feel like it's trying to get votes versus trying to do the right thing for kids.
So I do not recall the board giving me any feedback in terms of the MCT vote. So please enlighten me in terms of, I remember that being quite a bit of a celebratory night. I think everybody was on the same accord. So if I've forgotten something, please let me know. This is in direct guess, responds to the feedback and what we heard Monday night. It is my recommendation, right? So I'm the one who's supposed to bring something before you all, whether it passes or not. It is my hope that it's going to get endorsed, because obviously that owes to trust in how we're operating the district. But the two schools have something in common. They're co-located, they're not neighborhood schools. So that's the rationale, nothing else. So let's not speculate. Those are the two reasons. And on top of that, I believe those communities are ready for based on the feedback that I've heard all week long.
Is there feedback that you can share with us? Because I have yet to receive an email from MSLA or DDS asking to be shuttered. I'm trying to make an informed decision at the last minute at now 5:27 based off of a modified recommendation, and that I had no time to properly engage communities with, and I'm being blindsided with this right in the middle of a public meeting without any ample notice. And an email, text message, phone call, none of the above happened today, or in the last week that these conversations have happened. And so if there's information that these school communities have asked of this, then I believe that needs to be brought to this board for us to be able to make a consideration. I mean, again, unless my colleagues already knew about this, which it sounds like that's not the case, I think that if there's information to be had to make the case to close the school, that we need it.
So this goes back into community engagement. To expect community to say, please close our school doors, don't think that's ever going to happen, respectively. So no, that's not the feedback I received from leadership. They expect it, they understand it. And that to me is an endorsement of let's move on.
You may have the floor, Secretary Quattlebaum.
So I just want clarification on where we are in this proceeding. Have we opened this up for clear discussion on the
No,
recommendation?
Not yet, Secretary.
So that we
Quattlebaum.
can all weigh in on this?
No, at this point, I would have to ask my colleagues, ask all of you about this new recommendation. If we move forward with the vote, we would be voting on two separate motions, one for DDS, one for MSLA, and you would all need to tell me, we all need to weigh in on moving forward with the vote for those two, and not moving the motions forward for the other three. So you all need to speak on that at this point in time. So I will allow for,
Discussion is what I'm asking. I'm sorry.
so I will allow for, I can make the motion, or one of you can make the motion to have that discussion. So the motion would be, I make a motion to open up the discussion around the recommendation that Superintendent Maffaro has just presented to us, to vote on two specific schools, DDS and MSLA, and we would be voting on those separately, and can I get a second to have that discussion?
No, just trying to follow along. Thank you for the clarification.
So can you please restate your motion for clarity?
So the motion is,
Hang
Yep.
Chair is not.
okay, so Secretary Quattlebaum, would you like to make that motion so we can open up that discussion?
So the only way we can have the discussion is if we move to take the vote.
Yes, so
So-
right now, oh, go
I
right.
just wanna have the discussion,
So someone.
because I don't know if I wanna take the vote on that, so.
So there would have to be, well, the motion would be to move forward with the agenda item, which is the vote on the remaining two schools. It would be the first and second, and then it would open up debate on those items. And then when it comes, and then it would call for a vote.
So debate only happens if we move the vote, forward.
That's right.
That's what I'm asking.
Could I,
But I think you were also asking, you want us to have a discussion on whether or not we're accepting to move forward with the vote based on this recommendation. Right now, right?
Yeah, but I think he's saying in order to have that discussion, we have to agree to move to a vote.
I have a motion. I move to reject the
What?
superintendent's revised
You really need to
recommendation.
wait until the chair recognizes you, but go to Vice President.
I move to reject the superintendent's revised recommendation and reconsider the current 5 schools at hand, due to that is what this board was prepared to do, and this being a last minute shift.
So I would say that there is no other recommendation except for closing the two. So you can, there's no procedural mechanism for us to open up. You'd be essentially forcing the superintendent to make a recommendation for 5. The recommendation that stands is for 2, and that's what the motion would be.
So the clarification is the recommendation to.
Yes.
The recommendation, the recommendation is to, you are withdrawing 5 schools and proposing a new recommendation of 2 schools. I just wanna make sure that I have everything is right bucket.
No, that's not what it is.
Not withdrawing 5, considering 2 out of the 5, so 3 not to consider.
Can you repeat that? That's the problem.
So the recommendation that we were gathered to vote on was the unification of 5 schools.
Yeah.
So that's not what you're recommending. You're recommending the closure of 2 of those 5 schools. I guess I need to understand what the recommendation is and what's being taken off the table. And I need to work with them independently. So I need that clarification.
So, for the board's consideration, DPS to be unified with its enrollment zone, MSLA to be unified with Alberta.
So what are we doing with the recommendation that's laid out on the agenda as it states? That's what I need to know. What are we doing with that?
Secretary
Because that's
Cosmo,
the
can you
first.
send the question to, I think that's the question for attorney.
Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, we have a recommendation that we all came in thinking we were going to vote on. What are we doing with that recommendation? What happens to that recommendation? Because this is a different recommendation. So how do we take care of that one?
So, the recommendation can be, so this is just the district's position, and the district position can be amended up until the time.
I understand that.
Okay, so there's only the current recommendation. And I think because the way that it was noticed in the agenda as 5 separate resolutions. So each of these are to be considered independent. So it really is taking a little work off of the board, where the board no longer will consider 3 of the resolutions that have been noticed. And at this point, we'll only consider the 2 resolutions that are still on the table for consideration.
Point of inquiry for council.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A lot of things are making sense for me right now, and I have some concerns.
Oh, do you wanna, I mean, this is our time to ask those clarifying questions. Vice President Anderson?
So what's currently posted on both our facilitation guide is 5 different recommendations for schools. And also 5, and what's posted on board docs for the viewing public is 5 different resolutions for schools. So I'm trying to understand, why did we wait until right now in this moment to make a modification without ample time for the Board of Education to review this recommendation? This feels sneaky for me. So I'm trying to understand what is in the purview of
I don't think that's a question for council.
well, I'm trying to get the legal understanding of the posting. Because if an item for an agenda item is supposed to be posted 24 hours, and we're supposed to lock in that schedule 24 hours in advance, how can we make a modification of what is currently posted, what is currently on board docs, what is before the public? How can we alter that now when this is what's already published on our website? I was under the impression that once it's public, once it's published, and it's on our agenda, that is what we are discussing and debating, not last minute rescinding of plans and putting forward new recommendations to the votes. So what is in the purview of the law?
Well, let's allow allow Superintendent Marrero to answer that, because my understanding is a little bit different. I understand how it might look, like it's a new plan. It is the same school unification plan that came to us with 5 different schools. We all were aware of the 5 different votes that we were all going to take on each school. That was made aware to all of us. It was posted as such. Superintendent Marrero is asking us to only vote on 2 of the 3, 2 separate votes of the, 2 of the 5. And that is what he's asking of us right now. Did you want to ask another question? You're pointing this way.
For Aaron.
For Aaron,
Or
okay.
Mr. Thompson.
So you have the floor, Director Baldwin.
When we voted on MCT, was it just last month? If I remember correctly, sorry. I
Right.
If I remember correctly, we still voted on that because it was posted. I'm just thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, but just for consistency, I wonder if how we handled MCT should apply in this situation as well, just to make sure we're consistent.
So, so I can sort of answer Ayante's question and your question at the same time. What the board, in my view, did last.
And Director Baldwin.
Thank you for that correction. When, answer Vice President Anderson's question and Director Baldwin's question. In my view, what the board did during the MCT vote was pro forma. It was symbolic. It carried no actual consequence because the recommendation had been withdrawn. The board is certainly entitled to have that symbolic vote here today. That is completely within the board's purview. There are some strictures that would occur with that. Because it's a symbolic vote, there would be no debate on the motion. Secondly, to Vice President Anderson's question, as far as what the law requires in an open meeting law notice, there is no mechanism in the law that would require this board to consider a mooted point. So when the circumstances change and the vote is no longer required to move the business of the district forward, there's no mechanism that says that it has to be done. And that's the difference. To get the vote, there must be notice, public notice, according to the open meetings law. Once circumstances have changed to the degree that the point is moved and the business of the district is not impacted, there is no requirement that the board still vote on an issue that is not going to change. So not having a vote would have the same practical effect as having a vote, because there's just no recommendation to this.
Understood. Any other clarifying questions, Director Baldwin? Dr. Olson, would you like to ask any questions of legal counsel? How about Director Lindsay? How about Director Esserman? Okay. Secretary Quattlebaum, any additional clarifying questions?
No, I think we just need to get to
Get to those 2. So I will move down I'm reading for folks at virtual audience and in-person audience. I am reading right now on the facilitation guide that I have in front of me. We are going to go to a vote at this point in time on 2 of the 5 schools under the current school unification plan. And we will begin first with Denver Secondary School.
Has that been moved in a second?
Well, that's what we're gonna move on right now. So I'm gonna make a motion to move on voting Denver Discovery. And then somebody else have it. So each of you should have the board docs document, if you have the facilitation guide open, so we can go there. And the board, someone on the board needs to move to approve, to propose the school unification plan for each school.
If I
So
may,
if there is a motion to approve the school unification plan for DPS, I will.
If I may, I just want to clarify one point towards Director Baldwin's question. So in my view, it was symbolic, but I've just been corrected that the difference there was that the recommendation changed from closing MCT to remaining open. So then the board voted on whether or not FCT should remain open, whereas here, the recommendations have just been withdrawn, then there is no consideration there. Does that make sense? So when the, technically the recommendation, it's in the meeting minutes is what.
It's in the board doc.
So technically the difference was the recommendation was to close, then the recommendation was to remain open. That required a vote. Here, 3 items have been changed, the recommendation is changed such that 3 items no longer need to be considered. So it's still in pieces, it's still in part symbolic in my view because no action would have been the same, but I think because of the wording there, proposes
Director
action.
Esserman, is your question
have a
or
question.
council question? Okay. Recognize Director Esserman.
What happens if we don't move or have a second on either of the recommendations?
Then the discussion would be over as far as these topics until such a time as we have a first and second to vote, which we could postpone to the next meeting. So one option could be to move second and then move to postpone discussion.
That was the question.
Sure.
The question was, what happens if we don't move to act on these two items?
Then they would remain in limbo until such a time as they were reintroduced to the agenda.
Okay, so is that clear? Any additional questions for council? Is there a motion to move on Denver School Discovery Resolution number 5076?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
1 second.
Okay, now we open up for discussion. We'll open it up for debate and discussion, and we will allow some time for that. Vice President Anderson, you have the floor.
I'm gonna save my longer comments for the next school, but I'm gonna be very frank. I am disappointed. Dr. Brown, I'm disappointed in your recommendation because as a board, 3 weeks ago, we were at 10 schools. Then when the votes didn't seem like they were there, now it's 5 schools. Now that it doesn't seem the votes were there, now it's 2 schools. And I feel like we're playing politics with a bunch of kids and their education, and I've had enough of it. I've had enough of putting these communities in angst and limbo. I've had enough of this week. Well, I gotta, it's not about, it's about doing the right thing, and it's about students and not budget. I'm pissed, to be totally frank with you. And I feel like that this Board of Education should have been able to take up the original 10 recommendations, because I have in front of me, as everybody can see, I have letters from the schools that I have visited for the last 3 weeks. Letters from community members in both Spanish, but beautiful butterflies, and English, of students begging me not to vote to close their school. All for this performative again show for us to be like, ha, gotcha. And we're gonna hide behind that it was because the community spoke up. We knew they were gonna speak up. And so now we're here yet again with a revised recommendation from 10 down to 5, from 5 down to 2, and we're blaming it and putting it, saying that this is what, because we listened to the community, but we knew what the community wanted in the first place, and that was for us to be community-led and district-supported. Yet again, we are not being community-led. I have not heard anything from DDS or from MSLA saying that they are okay with this. I just haven't. And now that it's been moved in second, we're debating on DDS. I have visited the school. I've talked to students. I've talked to the school leader. I haven't heard. I actually have had folks ask for a second chance. So when I'm hearing information of you're saying that you believe that it is responsive of what you've heard is these schools are ready for this to happen, but as a board member, I have not heard it. I call BS. And so
Vice President Anderson, there's children.
I didn't cuss. I used an acronym. Pretty sure they hear it on TikTok. I think that this is ridiculous. I think this is just yet another way to try to get 4 votes to not be embarrassed by the rest of the superintendents or boards across the region. I'm voting no. I hope my colleagues will join me and vote no. And then I will be moving to rescind the small schools resolution tonight, because we should not be going through this process anytime in the near future until we figure out what community-led truly means for us. Because right now, we've just played politics with kids, and I'm pissed. And I can only feel for those families that now are at these two schools that are watching this meeting, and they're probably sitting there and saying, why me? Why was I didn't get taken out of the first round. I didn't get, I was a part of the original 10. I didn't get taken out of the original 5. I was a part of the 5, and now I'm a part of the 2. Why am I not worthy of the same opportunities that these other schools are worthy of? We're making kids fight for scraps. That is a white supremacist culture, and it is Black and brown people upholding white supremacy by making these students of color, families of color, fight for scraps. Our students are better than scraps, and my no vote will be telling our students in our communities tonight that I'm not going to continue to allow this performative show, regardless of who's the puppeteer in front of it, whether if it's a Black and brown man or a Black and brown female or an indigenous woman or indigenous female, regardless of who it is. We need to stop playing politics with kids. And so, board colleagues, I'm asking you to do the right thing tonight and to vote no on not just Denver Discovery School, but vote no on MSLA. And let's go ahead and get this community process right. Our community deserves better from this board. And right now, we are doing nothing more but upholding white supremacy and violating ends 1.1, dismantling systems of oppression.
Vice President Anderson, I'd like to ask that you be more respectful and not call out my indigeneity. And if you would do something to that next time as we're having this discussion, I do find that very disrespectful, but I wanted to open it up to.
You do know that there's other indigenous women in the world, right?
I would like to open this up for the rest of the colleagues to have time to allow for discussion and debate regarding the motion in front of us about the Denver school.
Point of information.
Denver Discovery School, sorry about that.
Point of
Yes,
information.
I am recognizing Director Lindsay at this moment. Thank you, Director Lindsay.
So I came here tonight prepared to vote not to close any of these schools for the same reason that's been restated over and over and over again. And on my conscience was these two schools, because I honestly think that the right thing to do is to close these two schools. They are not viable at this point. And looking at it solely from what's in the best interest of the students. I don't think it's political or anything else. These two schools are barely making it. They don't have any student base at MSLA. They don't have an ECE. They don't have a neighborhood designation to where they can get more students. They didn't have enough students this year to start the kindergarten class. And I think that, and looking at solely, because I've struggled with all these schools, and this has been very difficult to me. And so making these decisions, I'm trying to say what's the right thing to do, not based on what's popular or anything else, just making a decision solely based on what I think the right thing to do is. And I can't honestly say that I don't think the right thing to do is to vote to close DDS and MSLA. So that's where I'm coming from.
So, what was the last part that you said? Sorry.
I'm trying to do just what I think is the right thing in each one of the instances. And I have a problem with the process, and I have a problem with everything that you're saying about it. That it totally targeted minority schools, that it targeted the poorest of the students, that it targeted neighborhood schools, that it made it for kids difficult to walk to schools, that there was a lack of community input. All of that I agree with. But solely on these two schools, I like I said, I was prepared to vote no on all of them today, but when it got changed to this, I feel like I'm going to go with this because I think it's the right thing to do for me. And I'm not holding it against anybody else, whatever they want to do, and I'm just solely looking at what I think is the right thing to do for the students.
To open it up for others to share Director Baldwin, Director Esserman. We could always, we could always pause. We need time to think. It's okay.
I do have something to say, but I would go first.
So I believe that two things can be true at the same time. I believe that Vice President Anderson is correct, 100% correct. I also believe that Director Lindsay is correct, 100% correct. But just because those two things are both true, let me rephrase that. Because those things are both true, we need to come to a consensus in our hearts and in our minds. We need to make sure that we're joining the two. Here's what I mean. This conversation, as Dr. Burrow pointed out, is a tough conversation to have. But it is a conversation that we do have to have. But it can look different. That's what I heard you say, Dr. Burrow. Am I incorrect there? Because I don't want to go forward if I'm incorrect. That we need to make sure that we are doing intentional, meaningful, and authentic engagement with the community. Is that an accurate summation? So if we go off of that premise right there and apply it to these two schools, this is what we're looking at. We've not been transparent with them. We've not engaged them in an intentional, meaningful, and respectful way. We haven't hit those marks that you just agreed is how we need to have a conversation. So let's keep in mind, both things are true. But that's true as well, and that's the heart of DPS. We cannot forget the heart of DPS. I made it very clear, I've been very honest and transparent about my experience in the closing of Smiley Middle School. Smiley Middle School, generational. My 3 children went to Smiley, they continuated from there. Their father, my husband, went to Smiley. We have, I'm not gonna shout out any names, but we have people in this room that went to Smiley, that worked for DPS. And that school closed. But you wanna know what did happen? Is that community engagement that we agreed upon, that happened. The school still closed, but the engagement happened, and we as the community, we were there was a level of trust extended to us that with the correct information and the support, we came to the conclusion ourselves. We came to the consensus. So I personally reject the notion that communities will not do the right thing. I reject that. Hands down, I reject it. We understand what this means. But in our positions of responsibility, not power, but responsibility, it is imperative that we lead with integrity and make the hard decisions that have to be made. And this is a tough decision, but not for the reasons that you think. It's not choosing upholding white supremacy or doing what makes sense. That's not the decision that we're faced with these two schools. The decision that we're faced with is, are we gonna show the communities respect? Are we going to say, we know that you are reasonable parents, faculty, students even, community partners? Are we going to show and extend the respect that the communities deserve? That's the real That is really what we're voting on. We're not voting on here and we're not voting on here. We're voting on whether or not we are extending respect to these communities, to these school communities. That is what we're voting on. So if we vote yes to close the schools in this manner, here's what I'm saying. If we vote yes to close the schools in this manner, we are saying we don't respect you. If we vote no to close the schools in this manner, we're saying we respect you enough to have an honest conversation with you and come up with a plan so that when the school closes, because we can't deny the reality, as Director Lindsay pointed out, we can't deny that. But what we can do is say, we're gonna make sure that we work with you, so when this school closes, it closes with dignity. It closes so that these students and these families have positive memories. So that it's not just the hurt of the closing of a school, but there's the hurt there, but it's soothed over with the dignity and the respect that this leadership, and I'm including you, Dr. Marrero, because you're part of it, but that this leadership restored on November 17th, 2022. This is the day that we can restore dignity and respect to Denver Public Schools. This is the day that we can begin building trust within Denver Public Schools. That is what we are faced with. That is truly what we are voting for. Are you?
Director, Alderman, Director Esserman,
Yeah.
you are recognized, go ahead.
I want to first thank Secretary Quattlebaum for those words. They helped me focus what I believe I need to say and stay away from the distractions and the emotion of the moment. I want to share that as we were starting this meeting, I received a text message with a picture. Earlier this year, a woman who I taught with in my first teaching job passed away. And I was asked to, I've been asked to do a lot of interesting things. I was asked to help lead a memorial service for a Catholic memorial service. Some of you know I'm not Catholic. And I interacted with this woman's daughter. She was influential for me in my teaching career. We worked together on an 8th grade team. She was the language arts instructor. I was the social studies instructor. We did a lot of co-teaching together. And her daughter, just before this meeting started, sent me a picture of her headstone with the inscription that reads, "One teacher, one child, and one book can change the world." I walked into this meeting fully prepared to vote no on closing all 5 schools. That hasn't changed. What Director Quattlebaum, what Secretary Quattlebaum says is 100% accurate. What Director Lindsay says is accurate. When you were doing your listening and learning tour before I was elected, you asked 3 questions at every place on your listening and learning tour, right? I maybe mangled them. What are you proud of? should I know? I responded to what you should know, you may recall this, by saying trust is damaged between communities and Denver Public Schools. And I believe that you have an opportunity to address that. I don't want to get into the details of why we're now addressing something different than what we had prepared to address. We'll talk about that later.
Hold on, we're addressing that. Can you please mute all Zoom participants? Please mute all Zoom participants. There, go ahead, Director Smith, go ahead.
Okay. Appreciate that. I'm a public trustee. I answer to our communities. I had the opportunity this weekend to interact with the woman who led your search and to reflect on what a really impressive community-led, district-supported process that was, where ultimately it was the board who made the decision. But it was community who weighed in. It was students. It was members of our Vietnamese community, members of our Latino community, members of our Black community. It was the district accountability committee. It was, I can't even name everybody, because the Alma Advisory Group came in here and said, we're gonna do this differently. We're gonna trust the voices of our community, so that when, after you were hired, there were a handful of people who were critical of that, didn't carry much weight. Because we had invested, not we, had invested the time in community to listen to them. I'm reminded of what I told you last week and what I believe and what I've said publicly. We have created around us, as we often do in Denver Public Schools, a false sense of urgency. And by doing so, have cut out our communities. I agree with Secretary Quattlebaum that it's about respect, it's about dignity, but I also think it's about trust. I have been talking to people in this community and explaining to them, we as a board, we as a district, we as a team are going to get this right. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. I don't think the hard decision in front of us tonight is closing these two schools. I think the hard decision tonight is making a commitment to our communities that as a team, we're going to move forward and do this right. That we're going to provide the information that those school communities need to be our partners in this work. That when we announce and then when we present it to them, we're going to take the school-specific data and explain where the extra dollars are coming from. We're going to engage in those dialogues and conversations, and we're not going to promise them that we're not going to close their schools. But we're also going to ask them for alternatives. We're going to ask them for what they can think of. I've heard some ideas sound a little bit wacky, but I've heard some ideas out in community that bear investigation. I think that our bold leadership of this moment and in full appreciation of the work you've done and that your teams have done is that we can't vote to close these schools tonight. Because the message it sends to everybody else in Denver Public Schools is, no matter what I've said, at the end of the day, my words are just that. They're words, they're without action. And my words when I have said to you and everyone that I believe that we have to be a community-led and district-supported district are just words. I can't say, well, we'll do better moving forward if we haven't done as well as we can in this moment.
Dr. Olson, Director Bolton.
So I prepared some comments with the understanding we had the 5 schools before, so I'm gonna go ahead and read this as is. And this will just be my one set of comments for both schools. So these last few weeks, I made a conscious effort to keep an open mind and made sure to listen intently during the school community meetings and public comment. For 2 years, I knew this day was coming, and there will most likely be more as enrollment declines each year. Listening to the public comment confirmed much of what I already suspected, which is the district's market-driven administration policies and procedures are not equitable and frequently benefit advantage seekers. From day one of this process, I have focused on understanding those administrative policies and procedures and less on the schools recommended for consolidation and unification. When the list of recommended schools was released, I quickly realized it did not fully reflect my values and most likely not the board's values. This list reflected the values of the Declining Enrollment Advisory Committee, the DEAC. Every operational decision in the district should reflect the board's values because we are elected to represent the community. In particular, the 10 schools' free and reduced lunch percentages were glaring, and that was attributed to the DEAC's recommendation for minimum enrollment thresholds. And the DEAC recommendation stated, any district elementary or middle school with fewer than 215 students, not including ECE students, is considered a potential candidate for consolidation with neighboring schools. I am not aware of a school with a low FRL percentage that is also below 215 students. The possibility of schools below the inverted L showing up on a consolidation list anytime soon is very low. And that's not fair or equitable. I apologize for not speaking up about this in August when I first read the DEAC recommendations. I assumed this process would be contentious and frustrating for students, parents, and guardians, but I did not expect it to be this intense. I believe the source of the tension originated with the board not clearly conveying our values through executive limitation policies to Dr. Marrero. Again, I take responsibility for not speaking up sooner. I genuinely believe this can be a smoother process moving forward once the board creates our own criteria through executive limitation policies that reflect the board's values. Until the board completes its policy work, I believe the district should not allocate any more funding or resources to address declining enrollment. So once the values and executive limitation policies are defined, we can then determine the following. Do we need to consolidate schools at all? Is the community content with having smaller enrollment and fewer resources? I don't believe the answer is yes, but we need to ask. We need to find out. We talked about this yesterday. If we determine schools must be consolidated, we need to ensure the schools selected reflect the board's values. If the board, and not the staff or a committee, do this upfront policy work, Dr. Marrero will understand what is off limits. He can then present a multi-year declining enrollment plan the community is content with and the board should unanimously support. The fact this vote is not unanimous means the board has more work to do before Dr. Marrero and the district continue. I look forward to working with my board colleagues and the community to create executive limitation policies to address declining enrollment. Below are my initial thoughts based on what I have heard in community meetings and public comment. So first, adjust neighborhood school boundaries on a regular cadence to ensure there is an equitable balance between funding, resources, and staff. Remove inequities in the choice system that may lead to discouraging students from enrolling at a school or feeling unwelcome at a school because their needs cannot be supported. Third, we need guardrails to ensure any vacant building is not sold and continues to serve a community use. And we need to put an end to resources and funding going towards school level marketing with the purpose of increasing enrollment. And most importantly, we need to implement executive limitations around our voucher-like school funding model where the funding follows the student. So tonight, I was planning to vote no on the 3 neighborhood schools because closing neighborhood schools should be the last resort. I'm voting yes on MSLA and DDS. In both cases, I believe it's the best interest of the students, and I believe we should be moving away from co-location. MSLA is on the same campus, 50 feet away from their welcoming school, Val Verde. And based on Dr. Romero's unification plan, where staff have guaranteed employment at the unified school for 1 year, I am comfortable with this unification. And DDS Middle School is currently co-located with Swigert Elementary, and I am hopeful the district can continue to make that transition as smooth as possible for those students. President Gaetano.
Director Bolivar, just based on some of the things you said, I just have some questions for Superintendent Dr. Marrero. DDS is 93 students.
93 students. As of October count.
If this were to pass, those families would have the help and the support of the district to transition out of DDS to whatever other
Absolutely.
options and choices that they have to go to. Would they have full support of the district?
So we
What
have our
does that
school-
look like? Can you tell me?
Sure, so they're
What,
gonna have
what
dedicated
kind of
school
support?
choice personnel supporting them through the process for school choice and then enrollment. Which will be for the upcoming year, which will begin in January.
Will there be mental health supports, other supports aside from helping them choose schools? What does that look like in terms of, the emotional side, the traumatic experience of that? Can you tell me a little bit more?
That's a great question. So I think the important thing, as mentioned by Director Alderman, that it's forgotten in this unification effort that no other district has done. Allow me to emphasize that our professionals, the folks that they built relationship with, are following the students. So that will help tremendously. No other district is doing it that way. So that is an added support, those familiar faces. We make a great point. We can make sure that we can offer those supports to the families and the students as they engage in their welcome to school, considering it's an enrollment zone. And it's not a designated area per se, like would be for MSLA and Butler.
I'm seeing a hand raised here. You're recognized, Director Westerman.
I have to ask, how do the DDS teachers follow students in an enrollment zone where they're gonna go to 4 different schools?
Right. So we have 2 schools that are in that enrollment zone, the district-owned schools. So those are those particulars that we have to finalize as we finalize our PCTA MOU. But it's going to be those 2 schools that staff will most likely engage in. And hopefully the students will engage in those 2 sites.
Right, but the families can go to any 4 of those.
As the case with any school at any time. Yes.
Do you
Do you have a comment on that?
follow up?
Okay, go ahead.
Follow-up questions? Yeah, I had one more too, but
Go ahead.
what, because I'm still, processing and thinking through, my concerns around the financial viability in this district. I'm just considering everything. I'm just looking and still considering everything for this particular school for DDS. What can you share with me around the leadership? You know, I don't want to make assumptions just based on, me talking to them, but from your perspective, can you share with me and my colleagues? Are they prepared and ready for something like this and making this happen? What can you share with me in terms of the leadership of DPS?
It's a request for everyone to be louder.
Sure. So in
What can
case
you
of,
share with me with the leadership of DDS?
out of all schools, and I hate referring to a list, but the group of 10, there's no greater community, but also staff, even more so leadership that's prepared for a shift to happen. Heard that in all my visits, even last year when they were part of when we were engaging in the 19 schools, which they were not one because it was all elementary. The questions I was receiving during my first year here was, what happens to us? When is the middle school's turn? Leadership is prime for this shift. Some board members have heard the same. And leadership there is going to support our students, but also there's tremendous plans for that leadership in our greater district. So there's no better example of a school community that needs this to happen, not only for the students, for the families, but also as we right size and shift talent throughout the district.
Did I see a hand go up?
Parliamentary inquiry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I want to make sure that Dr. Olson has an opportunity to speak, as I know you haven't spoken, so I'd like to recognize Dr. Olson.
Thank you. I just wanted to be sure if Director Quattlebaum had a follow-up question on that same thread, because mine is just on a different tack. So if you wanted to ask a follow-up,
Yeah,
then that,
Yeah, so Secretary
thank you though.
Quattlebaum, you're recognized.
thank you. So, President Gaitan, thank you for mentioning the mental health, piece to this, and I hear you, Dr. Monaro, that we will be taking steps if these schools close. But the best way to address mental health is not to cause trauma. That's the best approach, is not to cause trauma. So if we take this vote and we vote yes, we are voting to cause trauma. Director Balderman, to what you said, that this process does not reflect our values. Therefore, it cannot reflect our values in voting yes for these two schools. It either reflects our values for all of the schools or it doesn't. So if we're reflecting, if we want this vote to reflect the values of this board, the only vote we can take is a no vote because it doesn't reflect the values. I respect and I appreciate your very thoughtful, intentional, and right on target words. But I just want to gently push back there that if we're honing in on what our values are, a yes vote to support the recommendation does not uphold our values. And we have to reconcile that individually, because then that'll speak to what your values truly are. I'm sorry to put it out there, but a yes vote tells community where your values are. I just have a question for Dr. Marrero, because you brought up the financial piece of it. Because ultimately this decision is the board's. So I'm not coming at you, I'm just trying to get information, understanding how you're processing this and where your line of reasoning is, so that I can take that into consideration. So my understanding, I'm not gonna set you up for it, I'm just gonna tell you what my understanding is. My understanding is that when it comes to the financial piece, because we do have a fiduciary responsibility, that this is not an urgent need, meaning next year, we will be at a point, a critical point of crisis if we don't close these two schools. So that's my understanding. But I do recognize that within 3 to 5 years, about 3 years, that is. And so my thinking is you're trying to be proactive and not bump up against the 3 years so that it's a dire situation in 3 years. That's an assumption that I'm making. And if that's an incorrect assumption, please clear that up. But that's an assumption that I'm making. And if I go with that assumption, I put to my board colleagues, we have time, especially with these two schools. We have time, even if we begin conversations in January. And that's the other question. Has the school leadership been engaging in conversation with these families at these particular schools? Because that's what our values are, right? That's what we're saying. Community. Building trust, working together, not creating adversarial situations. That's what we said our values are. And so if we're not engaging in that, then we have to take a step back. And as Director Balderman accurately pointed out, as a board, we failed to give you direction on what our values are. So we want to get this right so that you can move with a clear understanding of what our values are. So Director Balderman, I will join you in taking responsibility for not communicating our values.
Parliamentary.
But I'm communicating them tonight.
Parliamentary inquiry.
I need to give
So,
Director
point of order.
Olson,
Actually,
I need to give Director Olson,
so
Dr. Olson an opportunity to speak. She hasn't.
I
had-
object.
She hasn't
Because
had her
per
time.
Robert's Rules of Order 47.7.9, you are supposed to recognize anybody that makes a point of order and give them and cede them the floor. And then it is up to the chair, from my understanding, to determine if the point of order was in order. Am I correct?
So, a couple of things happening. Parliamentary inquiry takes precedent over other forms of debate. Director Ashman made a point of order, I'm assuming to address that priority. So that takes precedence. So first, the chair must determine whether the point of order was properly made. Likely was, then we address the question from Vice President Anderson, which is, and his right to ask a question. It sounds like he has a question about the procedure. And so that would be.
Vice President Anderson, you're recognized. What is your
Thank you.
question?
Parliamentary inquiry for council. If board members are not ready to make a yes or a no vote, they do have the liberty to abstain from the vote, correct? From our last meeting?
Yes, there's several options available, one of which is to abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of inquiry to follow up on that.
To follow up on this question?
Yes,
Okay.
to
Director
council.
Esserman is recognized.
Really? Okay. I'm supposed to talk louder. I've been asked to talk louder.
You've been asked to
I
talk
want to be
louder.
clear. I want to be clear. I've been asked to talk louder, so I'm gonna slither my voice. Everyone, myself included, has been asked to talk louder. I'm capable of doing so. In the event of an extension, we're still working off of 7 votes. Is that accurate? So an abstention would not prevent us from needing 4 votes to pass any motion. Is that accurate?
An abstention is the equivalent of a no vote, operates as a no vote.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize, okay, is this
It
regarding
was, no, it was based on Director Quattlebaum's
questions here? Okay.
questions. There were some questions.
Superintendent Dr. Marrero, you
Thank you for
recognize?
recognizing that.
Out of order. One of those questions was, in the sense that whether these schools are in dire straits. So I think the list.
The
of
district,
The district.
the district as a whole is what it was.
My response would be, the 10 schools were preventative. Not the case with these 2, in particular DDS. DDS is in dire straits. I foresee that they will have an operational closure, or terminal closure, if no action is taken. And although I agree with you and the line of questioning around mental health supports, my argument is the same leadership that engaged with me last year is different, with the exception of the principals. So they're suffering in terms of flight, in terms of folks that they've grown to love and adore, because those educators, those mental health providers, those administrators are going elsewhere. So that is a very particular situation.
I'd like to recognize Dr. Olson so she has an opportunity to speak and engage. Dr. Olson, please, you have the floor.
Okay, I see Director Quattlebaum. Did you have a follow-up with
Dr.
that?
Olson,
Okay,
please,
okay,
you have
all right,
the
okay, all right, sorry, just didn't want to interrupt the flow. So before I begin my remarks tonight, I just wanted to acknowledge all the people who have reached out to me via text, email, phone calls to engage around this topic. As many of you are aware, I had an unexpected death in my family and my mother became ill very suddenly. And I've been unable to respond to emails, visit schools, and return phone calls, and that's normally what I would do. And I am deeply apologetic that I wasn't able to do that. However, I would like to thank all of my board colleagues for helping me get caught up to speed. I would also like to thank Dr. Marrero and his staff also for helping me get caught up to speed while I was taking care of my family, and the community who've reached out to me with emails to help me get caught up to speed. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank everybody who came to public comment and who has shared so many heartfelt emails and comments with us. And I was asked this week why I always start out thanking people who have come before the board. And I think it's because I was a teacher whose voice was never heard and I didn't get a lot of thanks. So I just want to be sure that everybody knows that I understand that I've heard you and I have taken into consideration everything that you've said. I also would like to remind everybody that I've spoken before and repeatedly from my seat and privately and before I was on this board about the pain of the closure of a school, of Kepner Middle School. Director Quattlebaum, I share a lot of your comments about Smiley. I've shared that this experience was one of the most painful of my life and probably led to me being here today. Honestly, I thought I'd be still on the west side teaching in room 276 at Kepner Middle School, and here I am. The pain that I felt was echoed by so many people at public comment, from the children that I saw today when I met with them at Palmer, from the teachers, from the staff. And this pain stems from community engagement that didn't fully involve all the stakeholders in this process: the students, the families, the leaders, and the staff of our schools. Involving them is respectful, and I agree with you, Director Quattlebaum. Even if we end up at the same conclusion, I reflect back on my experience at Kepner. When we were at Kepner, we knew that things weren't good, and we asked for help. And in fact, many of you have heard me say that when the district said they were coming out, I thought they were coming to give us more resources, because we had said, we know things aren't good here. So my suspicion is schools understand, DDS knows that things aren't going well, but we have to acknowledge their views and what they think. I want to acknowledge that school closures are, as you said, Dr. Marrero, the most difficult task that any board or superintendent will undertake, and they rarely go well. And I know going forward, we may need to come back and address this again, but we cannot do it without the community, without involving the very people who are going to be living with our decisions for the rest of their lives, with families who are planning on their students continuing in a school. However, I also want to state tonight that tonight is not about blaming anybody. As I shared with President Gaitan earlier today in a conversation, I don't think it's anybody's fault that we've ended up here. I view it as a teacher, as Director Esserman always reminds me that I take everything from a teacher's lens. When things didn't go well in my classroom, I didn't point the finger. I thought, what could I learn from this and how can we do better? So I look forward to working with my colleagues to draft new policy resolutions, new ELs, or whatever it is that you're the
Not
master
ELs.
at, to guide our superintendent. And I think of what, both of you have said and taking responsibility. I'll take that responsibility as well, and not being as clear as I could have been with you, Dr. Marrero. I'm also reminded of what I see on the halls of Hallett every time I visit, and what Principal Jefferson reminds me of. We can do hard things together and succeed. I believe in us. I believe that we can do this. I also want to take a moment to thank the Declining Enrollment Committee and the staff that worked so hard on that. Many nights they gave up away from their family, working through really tough decisions, dedicating hours of time to give us thoughtful recommendations. So my vote tonight will not be a criticism of all the work that they've done or that the staff has done, but it's an acknowledgement of the work that we still have to do together. I've read the whole declining enrollment report, as we all have. I've sat through presentations. Some of my friends were on that. I got calls from them. I know it's really important that we look at all of their recommendations, especially the additional considerations in regards to engaging the community. I think that is very important. I know it wasn't intended to be exhaustive or comprehensive, but they gave it to us as they were charged with only developing criteria, but they put a lot of time into that. And I think it's important that we go back to that and look at what they did. We will build on what the Declining Enrollment Committee and the staff has already done. I will vote no on any recommendation to close the school. I cannot support it at this time. Dr. Marrero, I just want to say publicly, I still believe that you're the leader for this district, and I believe in all that you've done, and I know you have it in you to get this right. I remember the very first interview that we sat in on with you, and what impressed me the most is you pulled up the picture of your children, and you said you wanted to create a good school system for them. I know that you're going to get this right. To my board colleagues, I'm hopeful that we can all find a way to work with our sole employee. I think that we can put aside all of the things that divide us and find those grains that unite us and come together for the students and the families of Denver Public Schools. I look forward to working with you shoulder to shoulder with the staff and with Dr. Marrero. I just will be with you, and I commit to doing that with anyone who wants to show up and work, and that's where I stand tonight. Thank you.
Do we have more clarifying questions? I'm trying to squeeze some in.
I do, but I would just, yes, I just want to make a motion that we move to vote on, can I do that yet?
Director Patamon, I haven't had any, so, but if there's more questions, Vice President Anderson, you're recognized.
I would just like to share some remarks real quick before we move, and this would count for both of my school, or for both the schools and for consideration. So I'm speaking louder now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, today it'll come as no surprise to no one that I am a no vote on each of these recommendations. It also should surprise no one that I support rescinding the small schools resolution, whether if it's 10 schools, 5, or 2. These recommendations were developed without impacted school communities at the table. The district did not engage with staff, students, parents, families, guardians, neighbors, neighborhood groups, and developing proposals and options as the board has directed, and it only listened selectively to what the Declining Enrollment Advisory Committee recommended. While the district adopted its thresholds for identifying schools, it ignored everything else that the DEAC thoroughly provided and related on to how DPS should, in its word, ensure a fair and empowering process for local communities and leaders, and to actually lead this difficult work. I thus remain a no vote, aligned with the reasons Secretary Quattlebaum articulated. I can report that the board made progress in a recent policy governance session and having fruitful conversations around Executive Limitation 9, around not just informing parents, but engaging with them to empower the community in the district decisions going forward. As we look towards additional next steps, I want to be very clear about a few things. First, The board and the staff must get aligned immediately what we mean by community-led and district-supported. Nearly everything we do as a district needs to be community-led, period. That is true with the issue before us tonight, as well as the other issues that we must address in the coming weeks, months, including redistricting. I promise to our impacted schools that there will be no more further discussion on closures or consolidations until we get this principle of community-led and district-supported clearly identified into policy. My expectation is that we will create such a framework with you and not for you. Second, we heard a lot of concern about choice on Monday, and to be clear, I'm a pro-choice guy. Whether that choice revolves around a reproductive rights for an individual or the right of a student and a family to choose the school that is best for them, often for highly personal reasons. I was a student of school choice and took the bus 2 hours every single day, and I am a proud Manual Thunderbolt because of it. The path forward cannot involve treating families who use choice as enemies. I use choice, as I said, as a DPS student, and I am not your enemy. As a Black man, choice is self-determination, and I will not ask anyone to forfeit their ability to self-determine. I will not support I will not support a return to a system in which the district fundamentally makes choices for families and students. That is doing too. Excuse me. We also must remember that majority of Denver families who use choice pick a different district school. We actually heard from families on Monday night who drive from other parts of the city to attend the small schools that they love. These families are not our enemies. Third, we've heard a lot about charter schools. Those schools also serve Denver students and families, and I care about the human beings in those schools' communities too. We cannot treat them as enemies. They are Denver students, they are Denver families, and they are Denver educators. And truth be told, every charter school that has come before this board every couple of years and has to demonstrate to us that they are financially stable and have strong plans in place to provide quality service for students. This process is the charter renewal, which means that those schools are always on the proverbial chopping block. Our charters live with this threat every single time. Imagine that. Every couple of years coming before this board and asking that your school be allowed to remain open. That's something district-run schools are not having to do. They don't have the appealing rights either that a charter school has. If we were to close this school today, none of our schools that are on this chopping block have the right to appeal to a higher power, unlike our charter schools. And yes, again, charter schools have legal rights that district schools do not have, including the right to appeal to the state board. Do you know why? It's because those rights are often, they have those rights because districts often treat them as enemies, simply putting their governance type before, because they are simply a charter and not actually centering the needs of the students that they are serving. Finally, DPS must take the time to get any and all next steps right. We cannot afford to get this wrong. We have big challenges ahead, and we must begin it together. The board, the staff, and the community. The real boogeymen we all must grapple with going forward are declining birth rates and gentrification. There are simply fewer grade school age children in Denver, and that will be the issue for the foreseeable future. The question before us is, how do we create and sustain schools where every learner thrives with less funding? I remind my colleagues that as well as we have difficult statutory responsibilities before us, including redistricting, which we must complete on the required timeline and undertake the manner that is also community-led and district-supported. I wish to close with an apology to the communities of MSLA, Valverde, Columbian, Tre Vista, Schmidt, Godsman, Eagleton, Cal, Palmer, Montclair, Colfax, Cheltenham, Swansea, Columbine, Harrington, Denver Discovery, Fairview, and Whittier. I'm sorry that we've put you through this. I'm going to say that one more time. I'm sorry we've put you through this. And while I wish that this situation had been avoided completely, your activism and in Assata Shakur's words, to love and support one another have humbled and inspired me. It is a profound honor to stand alongside you and to learn from each and every one of you. Thank you, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Vice President Anderson. Is, do you have additional remarks,
Yeah,
questions?
3 quick.
Okay, you're recognized, Director. Evans.
Thank you, President.
Speak up.
I will find some way to do it. I want to appreciate the thoughts of all of my fellow board members and whatever Dr. Gaitan will say. Because all of us take this incredibly seriously, and I know that you do as well. I know the staff does. I know that. I want to acknowledge 3 things. I want to acknowledge that whatever the vote here is tonight is not a statement as to whether or not we're facing enrollment and fiscal changes. I don't think any one of the 7 of us denies that. I haven't heard anybody say that. I've heard all of us acknowledge that. And I want to point out that there's an element of this that starts with our state funding, that starts with the ways in which we're strapped and in which we are constrained by things like TABOR, that we are constrained by the state funding formula. And that I appeal to our Denver area legislators. I appeal to this blue tsunami that we've created here to change that, to address that. People are going to paint us as flush with cash, and what ends up happening is we are in fact fighting over scraps, and where we end up pitting school against school, community against community, district staff against whoever, board against superintendent, school staffs against each other, charters against district-run schools. We pit central office staff against school-based staff. We continually have heard, we just need to cut downtown. I need my HR department. I need more people in my HR department. I need people in payroll. I need people who work downtown. I refuse to attack those people, just as I refuse to attack the people who are working in our schools. We have all people who are working for that. And when we start to pit against each other, we only benefit those people who would tear us down. We do the work for them. And we have to stop. I also recognize, because I've listened to many voices, and there are voices that point out we're struggling to meet the needs of certain populations of our students today. In particular, our MLE students, who are largely Latino and refugee. In particular, our special education students. We know we're struggling to get the resources there. I recognize that part of this discussion was an effort to do so. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I know it's a problem. I'm committed to addressing it. I'm committed to addressing it together, as Dr. Olson so elegantly said. The problems don't go away because I vote no today. But we have an opportunity to build trust. Finally, the other words that I heard, and I heard, let me tell you, of the hundreds, if not thousands of emails to which I have not responded because I'm one human being and I'm not good at it, that are all from specific schools, that are students and parents sharing their pain. I'm also hearing from not just the schools that were up to be consolidated, but the welcoming schools, because this impacts them as well. And I have concerns about those impacts, even as we move forward without closing these schools. In our market-driven choice system, there are a lot that I took basic economics with Walter Johnson at the University of Missouri. About guns or butter and basic choices in economics. People out there making choices in economics are like, well, they can close it now, but are they gonna close it next year? So am I gonna send my child there knowing they may close this school? We have some things we need to address about that, regardless of where we end up tonight. And I think that's it. It's largely operational, but there are some things that we need to do and to address there as well. That would
Thank you for sharing your addressment. The market-driven educational system that we all decided to come and be aboard for has been weighing really heavy for me. The 15 years ago, give or take, when my 25-year-old was 10 years old, he was a fifth grader, leaving fifth grade to go to middle school when they, the district sent us a letter deciding to close our neighborhood middle school. And we were devastated, and we were excited about sending him to that neighborhood middle school only 5 blocks away from home. We went looking for another middle school at Kepner, only to be told that Kepner was also closing. It left us scrambling, trying to figure out where I was going to take my son. And both my husband and I worked full time. I was actually getting my education at Metropolitan State University at night. Just busy parents, right? Busy working parents, and it awakened me to the Denver Public Schools educational system and its issues, because I wasn't aware, I wasn't paying attention as a busy working mom. And it awakened me to the inequities of the impact to single parents, the impact to a lot of grandmothers in Southwest Denver that had no transportation to get their kid to another school outside of Southwest Denver. We ended up in a different district to get our kid to a middle school, and we had to scramble to change our schedules for work, and we had to figure out quite a bit. But that was a 2-income household, and I couldn't understand how a 1-income household, a single parent, or a grandmother raising her grandchildren would do it. And it was a pretty terrifying, traumatic experience for a lot of us in Southwest Denver. That led to Southwest Denver with this school choice system and this market-driven system to then drive Denver to close, Southwest Denver to close half of our public schools are now charter schools. That is a pretty frightening number to look at when you look at the wider scope of this issue, the issues of, certain schools being able to market to public school students and driving them away from the public school into other schools and charter schools, et cetera. In the case of, for example, Schmidt Elementary in Southwest Denver, there is a Strive just blocks away that markets to the local Schmidt Elementary School neighborhood. And they've lost many, many children from Schmidt Elementary into the Strive. That are some serious marketing efforts that we all as a board need to look at in terms of policy on how to protect our families and our students that are in these public elementary schools. How do we come up with and brainstorm ideas in policy, because that's what we do. We write policy, develop new policy, look at what other policies are inequitable and not working, and replace them with something more equitable to protect our schools. And there's many, many other policies that we can think about other than the marketing issue. There's other things that are happening in the district that we need to consider. There's lots of layers of issues to this as to why we've come to the precipice of this moment of having to make a decision to close schools. I'm not one for closing schools, period. I'm not one for closing neighborhood public schools, period. These public schools are beacons of our communities, they're beacons of our neighborhoods. And so we all need to remember that and remember that our community is looking to us to protect those beacons in your neighborhoods. All the layers we talked about all the layers. And there's other stuff that we need to look at. What are those issues? Gentrification being a major issue that it is very difficult for this board to fix that issue. So what relationships can we develop with local city council folks, with other state legislators to look at the issue of how they can help us curb gentrification so we're not losing our students from these neighborhood public schools. So that's on us to be able to, because you elected us to be able to do that extra work and put in the time to build relationships with those legislators. And so I'd ask for your patience while we work on that and while we brainstorm and come up with ideas to build on this policy that we all need to consider. Because school choice has caused school competition, and this school competition is causing us to lose more and more children in addition to gentrification. And so I need you all to really think about that and consider us and support us as we're thinking about policy, because that policy will give direction to our superintendent to get out and do the work that we all need to be done to protect our neighborhood public schools. Because you all sitting here in the audience, you all virtual audience, are looking to us to protect your schools. And how do we protect those neighborhood public schools? So give us time while we brainstorm and think about how that will happen using our policy structure, policy governance, and developing ELs, which are executive limitations, to do so. So I would like to extend an apology to you all, the community, for being so patient with us while we process this ourselves. Okay, I'd like to extend an apology to Superintendent Dr. Marrero as well for the same thing, for being patient with us while we process this and for not taking our time to give instruction and direction when we were being presented the information from the declining enrollment committee, and we should have spoken up and given an additional layer of equity to that was missing. Because we've experienced many of us have experienced school closure. We should have known because we were there and we should have spoken up. And so I extend an apology to you, Dr. Marrero, for not having done that, so that when you came with a recommendation, it would have come with everything that it needed in order for us to move forward and make a decision, make the appropriate decision. The declining enrollment numbers are, not your fault, not my fault. A lot of this is gentrification. It really is more than a decade. It's been more than a decade of this. And so I extend that apology. So I hope you accept that from this whole board. I'd like to give kudos and extend those kudos to you, to your team, for coming up with the idea of the declining enrollment committee with over 30 plus individuals that came together from across the district to put in the work. The fact that you had to pull these people together, pull resources and funding to make this happen. We learned from it, and we have to do something with it. This issue is not going to go away, but how do we curb the issue? We have to take the information from the declining enrollment committee, our own work with the ELs, the executive limitations, with the help of Dr. Charles as our policy governance expert, and start adding these layers of equity to these decisions, because they're not going away. they're gonna be here and these families are expecting us to make a decision, we have to vote on this. It's gonna happen whether we like it or not. And so when we vote on it, it's gonna have that additional layer of equity, and we will do it the right way and allow families to really sit with this, build equity into it, build some mechanisms where we are protecting families. Trauma is gonna happen. It's gonna happen when we end up voting on a school closure. How do we minimize the trauma? How can we minimize that impact? We all need to think about that when it happens, because it will happen. It happened to all of us. We know what that feels like. We know the pain as parents. We know the pain of our children when it happens to our children. And we need to make a decision on all of these different layers, and that'll come with policy. We need to do our part. We need to do our job. And the onus then falls back on us. At this point, it doesn't fall on the superintendent. He's got to wait on us now. Our superintendent has taken it as far as he could. He's done his job and he's done it adequately. So I want to make sure that he gets credit for that and appreciate more than adequately. And I appreciate you for that. And I appreciate your team's patience, and everything they've done to support us and get us through this. You know, folks like Liz Mendez and others that have put in the work to bring forth the facts and the numbers. I do believe that we have a fiscal responsibility, right? There is an issue with the budget. There's an issue with the student-based budgeting system that we need to take a look at as well. Some of my colleagues may disagree with me, but that formula is not working. It is not working, and how do we make changes to that? And that is not your fault, that's on us. You are working with what we've given you. And so I hope that my colleagues will consider everything that I've said in order for us to make that right decision. At this point, we have to vote for DDS, move on to the next school and do a vote. But I'd like to remind our viewing audience to hold us accountable to do the policy work so that we can move forward and determine if there is a school closure, we do it the right way with all of you. I'm not gonna tell you, I'm not gonna paint a pretty picture that no school will ever close from now on. We don't know that. The budget is showing us that there are rates, and we need to make sure that this district can continue to be responsible with the funding that lies on us. And now we're gonna have to look for money if we don't close any of these schools, whether it was 10 or 5 or 1 or 2. We now need to look for money for these schools. And Dr. Marrero and his team are gonna look to us to figure out, where is this money gonna come from? What direction and instruction are you giving us to go look for that money? So know that that is another layer that now we have to decide on where that money's gonna come from, okay? With that said, if no other comments and no other points to be made, we're going to go ahead and start moving for a vote. And I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Atwood to please call roll.
Director Anderson?
No.
We technically need to move the previous question to end discussion and debate. And move to the vote.
So at this point, we're wrapping up with debate and discussion. It's my understanding that we could just move to a vote since we've ended that.
Yeah, there's only call for previous question. Previous question would stop debate.
I know you voted, but let's repeat that. Miss Atwood, would you please call roll?
Okay, Director Anderson is a no.
No.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esserman,
No.
Director Gaitan,
No.
Director Lindsay,
No.
Director Olson,
No.
Director Quattlebaum.
Are you okay? Oh, okay.
All right, with that, the motion does not pass to close DBS. We are then moving on to the next school. Give me a moment while I scroll to that item. So each board member should have a copy of the, if you open in board docs, MSLA or Math and Science Leadership Academy Consolidation Resolution number 5079. Is there a motion to approve the proposed school unification plan, applying the DAC criteria to MSLA?
So moved.
May I get a second? I get a second. The MSLA vote.
Just the vote.
The, well, to open it up for discussion and vote.
If we fail to get the second, it just fails, right?
So I'll second to open discussion.
Thank you. So now we open it up for debate and discussion. Vice President Anderson, you have the floor.
I move for previous question. That would be the second. So that means just go to the vote.
Second.
I have one question for Dr. Moreau, but I'll proceed here.
So as you seconded, now we,
Perhaps one of the members want to withdraw the motion.
I'll
yeah,
withdraw the
Nita,
second.
would you like to withdraw your motion?
I'll withdraw the second.
Okay. We will give Director Baldwin the floor.
I think I understand where this vote's heading, but so this spring will be my 4th spring as a board member, and this is when budget season opens for schools. What are the implications of, and one thing I've noticed every year, I get a lot more emails from parents advocating for more funding to their school. And next year is probably it's gonna be even worse. Ribs are increasing, like what do you see the implications are? And this may be too hard of a question, but generally, do you have concerns?
Tremendous concerns. That's one of the schools that I visited this morning that I referenced earlier, as I saw students walking towards the neighborhood school, in particular this school, although there were some students who are from the neighborhood, some weren't. Hence my modification to recommendation. And clearly, as indicated, let me use this as an opportunity to say that I have not and will never count votes. That's not my position. My position is to provide the information, rationale, and whenever it doesn't pass, as feedback for me and my administration. I do believe that this has been performative and political, but definitely not by the superintendent and DPS. Just for the record. When it comes to this school in particular, my conversation with Principal Lane was 20 students that may not return will devastate that school as well. They're along that way. So, don't know what you were alluding to, President Gaitan, but after, how we define re-engagement and how we, I guess, prescribe policy, there's a very good chance that I may be coming to the board with a request to tap into reserves. So potentially that could be one of the ways that we can address this.
Did you want a question or just additional commentary?
Along the same line. Thank you for your frankness, and, forethought of what is to come. And that is something that we will have to make the bold decision to support the decisions that we're making tonight. And I did not get an opportunity, and I usually have it in there, Dr. Marrero, where I thank you and I let you know that I do believe that you are the person who brought some very creative and innovative solutions to hard decisions. And I'm just echoing what I've said before, and I'm excited for the day where I don't actually have to say that, because it's just something that's known throughout the community.
Did I see Vice President Anderson?
I moved to previous question.
Please speak up.
I moved to previous question.
Second.
Is there a second here? Okay, Director Baldwin's, or Director Esserman, second that motion. And do we open up for discussion or for a vote? We now head to a vote, so I will ask,
Voting, then if you vote yes, you're moving to close debate and move to the actual vote. If you're voting no, you want to keep the debate, and we would continue on to this discussion. So this is not on the school, just for clarity purposes.
yes, meaning that you, are ready to move into the vote. Okay?
I don't want to cause confusion by,
If we're done talking.
okay.
Say that again, Director Baldwin.
I just want to make sure we're not causing confusion by voting on closing debate. And then the very next vote, just want to make clear to the
To
public.
our public,
Yes.
we are voting at this point to close debate,
Yes.
not on any school.
So at this point, I'm gonna, motion over here to,
To make this easier, Madam President, with advice of counsel, just without objection, you could approve the motion if there's no objection to the closing of debate. So we don't have to go through a voice vote.
okay, is there any objection? Okay, seeing none, we will close debate now and we will, move to, vote, the motion for a vote for MSLA, to close MSLA. So that was what we are voting on right now in this moment in time. So I will ask our board secretary, Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson,
No.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esterman,
No.
Director Gaitan,
No?
Director Lindsay,
No,
Dr. Olson,
No.
Director Quattlebaum.
And with that, that motion does not pass. For the viewing audience, once again, we ask for your patience while we work through. There's a lot of work that needs to be done going forward because this discussion is not over on school closure. And so not only do we ask for patience, but we ask for you all to hold us accountable to find those short-term and those long-term solutions because this discussion and this debate on school closure is not over. And so it will continue to come back up again in the next several months. We just need to add these layers of equity through our policy as we work through that. And you all will want to come back and visit us again. So with that said, I will
Madam President,
now be.
just want to thank the board for making the decision and for the feedback, as I mentioned earlier. How we vote, we all is feedback. Yay, terrific, move on to the next decision. A nay tells me, okay, let's go back and re-approve. So thank you.
I still have the BS3 item on the agenda,
We have,
so we can withdraw. Okay, do we have a withdrawal?
I'd like to make a motion to,
BS, the next item or something else?
Or what are we
Small
doing?
schools.
there's small schools resolution rescission is next.
Oh, I thought we were on the, yes.
I'm sorry, if I have the wrong agenda, please let me know, because I am looking at,
Item 4.
Okay. got it, okay. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the, small schools resolution number 5022. The board will now move to rescind resolution number 5022, small schools resolution. Is there a motion to accept the rescission of small schools resolution? Vice President Anderson?
Madam President, I move to rescind small schools resolution number 5022.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Director Esterman? And now we open up for debate and discussion.
I do actually have comment. Go ahead, you please first.
I would go ahead and close debate. Go ahead.
Close it. Okay, okay. So I took the opportunity to review the resolution because it was voted in 18 months ago, and I checked in on my speeches. I was like, what did I say at that point? And I was trying to look at my previous notes to figure out how we got here. And the meeting was it was a very somber mood, very cordial, respectful. The two things I mentioned in my speech, I'm gonna pat myself on the back, was marketing. So I was saying that back in June of 2021, And then I also highlighted my concern over the state board overruling the board on time. I can't remember which board. Anyways, we were overruled. That was the first one, and then since then, the second one has happened as well. So, and my concern that I was voicing was over how do we address declining enrollment while we're also having to deal with these outside pressures and state laws that require us to sometimes open charter schools as mandated by the state. In addition, the resolution was really intended to start the process. And if you read it, I have it here, there's not really anything too out of line in it. There's really just one piece that now looking back, I wish I would have been again more vocal. It mentions options will include schools that can sustain enrollment above 300 students in elementary schools and the threshold to be established for secondary schools. So again, my previous comments of removing that threshold as a basis is how I think we get to a more equitable process and all this. And I also think the title is very misleading. The fact we call it a small schools resolution, I don't think is accurate. What this really should have been about is declining enrollment, because there's really only one mention. The word closure shows up one time in the entire resolution. So the policy governance side of me is wanting to vote no, but I also understand the human element of this and the need for the community to understand the messaging behind it. There might be some confusion behind it, so I'll vote yes on this as well. I also want to say that I was very hesitant on voting yes the first time. I didn't voice that, but I had great conversations with Director Kovion at the time, Director Lorvik, who were the authors of the resolution. And eventually I came around because the reality was the district was already moving in this direction, regardless if we did the resolution or not. The work was already happening. So I'll support this. I also want to highlight, so we don't have to bring this up on the next agenda item around DSR 3. As we shifted to policy governance, you probably noticed we haven't done a single resolution in a year, which is a good thing. We've been communicating to Dr. Marrero through our policies. I think the right way and the permanent way to do this is to update DSR 3 at a future work session to make sure that Dr. Marrero the superintendent is only accountable for our ends policies and our executive limitations. And if there's any resolutions from, who cares how far back, we take those values that we want and get those into executive limitations. So I'll vote yes, but wanted to squeeze that in.
Any other additional comments or discussion?
Go first.
Go ahead.
So I first want to acknowledge Director Angela Kovion and Reverend Brad Lorvik, who worked on this along with the staff. I also remember how hard they worked on this and thought a lot about it, especially during the pandemic, which was hard to be thinking about. And they did this with a very clear intent that this would be community-led and district-supported. But it's now on us to make sure that we're defining that with community so that, as we've said, we give clear direction to Dr. Marrero. I will vote tonight to rescind this small schools resolution. And I want to be very clear with my colleagues and with Dr. Marrero, we have work to do, as we've all said. And I will welcome the opportunity to work with all of you in crafting whatever we need to craft and work towards a brighter future for Denver Public Schools.
Director Lindsay, would you want to share?
Yeah, well, my thoughts on it are that it creates an artificial reality that, so you're trying to fit what actually exists into something that maybe is a utopia version of what should exist, and that's not really possible or feasible or make any sense at all. And it would be, ideally, a lot of the stuff in there would be great, but it's just not the way the neighborhoods are set up. It's not the way they're ever going to be set up. It's not the way the students are going to function. It's not the way the students are going to choose schools. And a lot of these small schools are doing a really good job of educating these kids. And a lot of everybody is doing the best they can with the resources they have. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of rescinding it.
I'll make a motion.
Oh, okay. I'd like to give others a chance to talk. So, Vice President Anderson.
I am going to be voting yes to rescind the small schools resolution, and I just want to be somewhat brief and just ask our community to utilize this as an opportunity to start trusting us again. You came to us, and hopefully it passes. I've heard 4 folks say that it will pass. So I am asking you all to begin the relationship with us again. I know that trusting this district is not easy. I know trusting the board is not easy. And I'm hoping that you understand that your hours of testimony did not go in vain. Your advocacy, your emails did not fall, that were not ignored, and that I heard you. And so today I'm proud to be a yes vote to rescind the small schools resolution so we can get this right. And I understand this is not, some folks may say we're just avoiding the inevitable, but I believe that this is an opportunity for us to go back to the drawing board and for us to go work with you in partnership. Because in order for us to be Denver Public Schools, that means the public has to be involved in all the decisions we make, not 3 p.m. meetings, 5 p.m. meetings in your gym or in your cafeteria saying this is the future decided for you. Because I let folks know when I went to schools, you may have felt that the decision was made, but the decision lies with this board. And I think today we have shown through our values, we don't close schools without community leading us through this process. And today we will rescind the small schools resolution and work together with communities. And we are going to get this right for all students. And so thank you for holding us accountable for your emails, Facebook, texts, calls, your letters. I'm thinking of the hundreds of letters I have here from students across the district in both English and in Spanish. The butterflies are really nice too. And I'm just thinking of the students that are going to wake up tomorrow and be able to have a dance party somewhat in their lobby. That's if there's not a snow day. And so I'm hoping that
Can you read my lips or something?
well,
There's no snow day.
It's not. Well, I'm hoping this will help restore some of the faith in the district for you.
Would anyone like to add any additional comments? You have the floor, George.
Thank you, President Gaetan. I want to recognize that our taking the time and me even opening my mouth at this point to continue the conversation is not taking time to talk about students, so I'm going to keep this brief. We, as a board, inherited some mess. Not pointing fingers, because there was a lot going on. There was COVID, and there was excellent response to COVID on the part of the board. There's distribution of meals, there was distribution of devices. There were a lot of good things going on. But in the meantime, in the midst of knowing that the previous board wanted to vote in policy governance, they were also passing resolutions that they knew weren't part of policy governance. So we have to fix that. We have to move forward, and that's what I'm interested in, is moving forward. Sometimes you have to take a step backwards to move forward. At least that's what I've been told. This is a step back to address a policy that we talk about something a lot on this board that had unintended consequences. We talk a lot about intent versus impact. I believe the intent of this resolution was to address the fiscal realities that we need to address, which I think all of us have made clear. Just because we rescind the resolution, just because we vote no to close these schools, doesn't mean anyone on this board is burying their heads in the sand and saying we don't have to address this. But we do have to move forward. And this is what we need to do in order to be able to do so, as Dr. Marrero has actually let us know, by making it clear that his actions around this have been based on the constraints of that resolution. We have to remove those constraints. We also have to provide appropriate guidance on what comes next. That's all.
Dr. Olson, I don't remember if you had your
No, I'm good.
comments about this. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll make a few comments and then we'll move for the vote. The small schools resolution, and I want to say this as respectfully as I can because I appreciate the work that Director Colbian and Reverend Lorvik was gonna call him Dr. Reverend Lorwick did. This was very intentional work on their part, and I don't think they did this purposefully, but it does to me, target small neighborhood schools, our public neighborhood schools. Not that they did the work to intentionally do that and target that, it did result in that. And it breaks my heart that that happened. I also do want to give them that credit that they put in their heart and soul to try to find a solution for the fiscal issues that we still have today, that we all need to find solutions for. The other issue with it, well, not necessarily, I shouldn't say an issue. I do want to give credit to the teams, the DPS teams. Well, you know, they were teams before your time, Dr. Marrero, but they are your teams now. Is that there was a lot of resources and time and staff time put into the small schools resolution to gather data, research, et cetera, to even develop the resolution, and to also move it forward into the declining enrollment committee. So I need to acknowledge and recognize all of that work from the DPS teams and the staff, and the fact that there was resources spent. So we all need to consider that there was money, there was funding put into this small schools resolution, pre-resolution, through it, and now. And so we need to be fiscally responsible for that money that was spent. And so we need to be wise with it. And so by rescinding it, we need to ensure that whatever pieces are equitable pieces within it, that we are moving them into these ELs, into our current state of policy, because we don't want to be wasteful in that way because of the money that was spent into it. So let's be thoughtful and let's be considerate of how to move those equitable pieces into what we need to move forward with our work, to allow this district to be fiscally responsible. And so that we don't put our superintendent in a position to not run this district in a fiscally responsible way. That's up to us. So I just want to share those thoughts about the small schools resolution. And we will now, if there's no other thoughts or questions or concerns, we will now ask Board Secretary, Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esterman,
Aye.
Director Creighton,
Aye.
Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
Aye. And the motion passes. Thank you. We have. BSR 3 item, was that, okay, so that was pulled. Let me move to the next item on the agenda. Oh, got it. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the BSR 3 discussion. That is a board and superintendent relationship policy that we are calling BSR 3. And so I am going to then hand it over to Director Quattlebaum, who is wanting to make a motion on this specific item on the agenda. Director Quattlebaum?
I motion that this item be removed from today's agenda and put to, future work session.
Okay, can I get a second?
Second. Third.
Okay, and now we open for discussion or debate. Okay, seeing none, we move to a vote, and I will ask Board Secretary, Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson,
Aye.
Director Balderman,
Aye.
Director Esterman,
Aye.
Director Creighton,
Aye.
Director Lindsay,
Aye.
Dr. Olson,
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum.
I,
And the motion passes. I just want to explain to our viewing audience, virtual and in person, the importance of BSR 3. And to keep an eye on that, we'll work on this through our work sessions because the information in that will really help guide our superintendent in doing the important work of declining enrollment and school closures, et cetera. So keep an eye out for the work that we will be doing. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. So we're ready to consider that. So Ms. Atwood is going to join us because she will read the items on the consent agenda. And my colleagues, if you want to hold any items within that consent agenda, this is, we can do so for further discussion. Otherwise, Ms. Atwood, would you please review those items?
7.01, approval of the minutes from the October 20th, 2022 regular board meeting. 801, intergovernmental agreement between Denver Public Schools and the Denver Urban Renewal Authority, redevelopment of 27th and Larimer.
Hold, please.
And approval of the personnel transaction, 11.01, approval of the personnel transaction report.
So we are holding, I don't know the number, I don't have the number of the item.
8.01.
8.01?
Uh-huh.
And at this point, do we have to move into discussion or vote first for the rest of the consent agenda and then go back to that item? Okay. All right, so holding 8.01, can I have a motion to approve current items on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Third, second.
Ms. Atwood, would you please call roll?
Director Anderson?
Aye.
Director Balderman?
Aye.
Director Esterman?
Aye.
Director Gaitan?
Aye.
Director Lindsay?
Aye.
Dr. Olson?
Aye.
Director Quattlebaum?
Aye.
And with that, the consent agenda items pass. Do we make a motion to discuss the items held?
So moved.
Director Esterman, well, okay, I made the motion. Director Esterman is moving. Can I get a second?
Second.
And then we'll open it up for debate and discussion.
This is what we debated on last month, right?
Yes,
I thought we took,
the same.
okay, no, yeah, I'm grateful that we pulled it. Am I missing something? Why? I thought we weren't debating, like, 'cause I thought that was not on the agenda this month. Maybe that was just an ART issue.
No, it had to be, we didn't vote on it last month.
Okay,
We held the vote
okay.
and we knew that Dura has to take this
Ah,
to city
I
council.
remember now. Yes, never mind. I withdraw my comment.
We postponed it to this meeting,
Yeah.
when I go back and look at the
Yeah.
vote, the vote was to postpone it to this
Let's
meeting.
go into this
Okay.
meeting. So rediscussion.
I wanted to, one, so that everyone knows, I don't wanna make any assumptions. The Denver Urban Renewal Authority Board has commissioners who are appointed by the mayor. Mayor has appointed as one of those commissioners a sitting member of the Board of Education that has up to, and maybe even if specifically appointed the treasurer of the Board of Education to serve in that position. And so I have been serving in the position on the Board of Commissioners of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority since I took office. So since January or so. I want to acknowledge that the executive director of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority, Tracy Huggins, is here with us this evening and stayed with us through all of the things. This being the last agenda item, and wanted to share before we moved into vote. She sent us a letter earlier today that I forwarded that I'm guessing most of us didn't have the chance to read. So I wanted to share that. And I wanted to give, ideally, our finance team that Dr. Murphy just pulled out and Ms. Huggins the opportunity to answer some questions. But first, I wanted to share the letter. I think we can do this one of two ways. I can either read